So according to a dictionary, the sublime is a feeling of awe or admiration that's inspired by grandeur or beauty. It's a feeling caused by nature that's so powerful it renders us almost insignificant. And in a way, it's almost reassuring, because to stand in front of a scene that's so inspiring, that fills you with so much awe, that it kind of takes away all the worries and concerns that you have with your everyday life. You're just so occupied, you're so overwhelmed with what you're seeing in front of you. It inspires you and touches you so deeply that it just takes you away from all that. For the last 2 days we've been in the Icelandic highlands, which is a place that wherever you look you can see that it's just been shaped by time and by nature. There's very little here that's been touched or tamed by man, and it's one of Europe's last few remaining wildernesses. Now, from a photographic point of view, there are all kinds of challenges here, because you're not presented with any obvious focal points. There's nothing that really sort of jumps out and leaps at you as something that you want to take a photograph of. Instead, you're kind of inspired by everything that's around you and by the overall landscape. So the challenge is to try to capture the essence of that, the feeling of being in this landscape that's all around you and everywhere that you look, and to reduce that and distill it down to a four-sided frame. So what you have to do is slow down and let it sink in. Let the landscape take its time to sink into you. The most obvious compositions, the things that you see first, are not always the best compositions. They're not always the things that you should be trying to build a composition around. And sometimes it can be really easy to get sucked into that. You find a particular rock or something in the foreground, or a particular mountain, and you can spend ages trying to work that into a composition.
Regular foregrounds aren't important in places like this, where there's just this expansive whiteness, and so using a wide angle just reduces the scale and impact of the distant hills and makes them appear smaller. So a telephoto is better as it pulls the landscape closer to you, but you have to give thought to how much space around it you're going to leave. You need to give the idea of space, because if you make it too cramped, if you frame it too tightly, it's going to feel really, really cramped. But too much, lose too much space, and you lose the scale of the landscape and diminish the size of it. Now, these abstracts, I was playing with the lines. The light here isn't at all dynamic. This was actually made in the middle of the day, but shooting a scene like this, it doesn't really matter. It affects the mood, but it doesn't define the success or failure of the image. With abstract images, simplicity is the key. Looking for simple lines or forms like curve or converging diagonals, it's really different from shooting wide angle, where you're capturing the whole scene and trying to create as much depth as possible using other elements in the frame like a foreground to balance the composition. With abstract, you're not trying to show the whole scene, just a part of it that's the distillation of the landscape that manages to capture its essence. So here it's just white with the lines of the hills, nice and clean and simple. Because the landscape was so flat and featureless, it was impossible to get depth with a wide angle, but with an aerial perspective, it was possible to get that depth, but the image really lacked a focal point. So I used myself standing next to the 4x4 to provide some scale. Now, using a figure in the landscape like this, I find it can really be helpful to communicate not just the scale, but also the sense of power and awe from the landscape. Now, this is a technique that's been used for hundreds of years in paintings. Caspar David Friedrichs, the German romantic painter, included figures in his paintings like Wander Above a Sea of Fog or Two Men Contemplating the Moon in the early 19th century, at a time when wilderness and the sublime, that sense of awe from nature, were just beginning to enter the public consciousness. Now, using figures communicates not only the scale of the landscape, but also the feeling of the person within the landscape, of being overwhelmed by the immensity of the geology and the enormity of time that it's taken to form these places. The waterfall at Haifoss is a place I've visited and photographed many times from multiple different angles in the summer, but in the winter it's a pretty challenging place. First of all, you need a specially modified 4x4 that can drive over deep snow to be able to get there. And even then, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to shoot. Now, the last time I'd been there, there'd been some of the strongest winds I've ever seen, which made it utterly impossible to shoot, or pretty much even to stand up. And on our first visit on this trip, the whole scene had been covered in so much cloud that we couldn't even see the waterfall. But on this morning, we were finally able to see the waterfall in good light. Now, again, there's not really dynamic light here. What I mean by good light is that it was the light that was appropriate to be able to make the image. This is actually taken around lunchtime, but in scenes like this, you can create emotional images with cloudy conditions. Snowy scenes work all day long, I find, and a location like this, it has a power that I think it's brought out better in moody conditions. So first of all, I shot the scene with a wide angle. Now the trick for this composition is to include the whole of the valley as it leads the eye through the landscape and creates a depth. And also to ensure that I wasn't including any of the ground at the edge of the cliff that I was standing on, because I felt that was a distraction and really broke the feeling of the openness of the landscape. Now, while that image captures the depth of the scene, it reduces the size of the waterfall. So while I was here, I did some telephoto abstract shots, just zooming in on the waterfall, using the black rock behind the water and the fantastic details in all the frozen ice to contrast with the water. Here, I really felt that a fast shutter speed that froze the movement of the water worked better than a long one that would blur the water, because blurring the water, it really felt like it softened it, and that diminished its power to quite a big extent. Vestrahorn is another place I've been lucky enough to visit many times, and it never ceases to amaze me. It feels unique because you can frame the whole sweep of the mountains here, from left to right, where they rise up out of the black sand beaches at the edge of the ocean. Typically, when you arrive here, you naturally gravitate towards the ocean. It's sort of that's where all the footsteps go. That's where people tend to walk. And you use the dunes or the ocean as a foreground. But that side also often has quite a few people walking around, and there are footprints everywhere, which I find can break the mood a little bit when you're looking for that feeling of enormity, when you're looking for that feeling of the sublime. So we tried walking in the opposite direction, looking for an open foreground which had a clear view of the peaks, where they weren't dominated or obscured by the dunes. And this open spot here worked really well. There was a small pool where I could get a partial reflection of one of the peaks. And then it's just a moment of waiting for when the peak light comes. Now, it didn't last long. And pretty soon after that, the light got a lot harsher and really changed the mood of the scene.
Ultimately, when you're trying to capture something as incredible and immense as the sublime, you have to be prepared for failure, because it is going to happen. But it's through these failures that you genuinely tend to find something that works. Keep trying things in the field, experimenting with different compositions, with different focal lengths, because often in the field you don't really know how successful you're being. It's only when you're sitting back looking at it in front of the screen that you can really truly understand which of the images that capture it and which where you fail to do so. And another thing that we found during the course of this trip is that it's really easy to be so focused on looking at everything through the frame of photography, through the technical aspects, through the compositional aspects, that you can sometimes just forget to just stand back, stop, and take it all in, because just being here is an incredible experience, and that's what you're trying to capture.
Here in the ice cave, for example, I was so focused on getting the shot, I didn't really take the time to appreciate how incredible it is to be standing beneath 800-year-old ice. The glacier has been here for centuries, the ice shaped and carved by the elements along the bottom. It's a truly astonishing place. But our time here was limited, space was cramped, and the light was low. So instead of really taking the time to be amazed at the place, to take it all in, I only saw it from a technical point of view of making the image, dealing with the light, having the foreground ice so close to the top of the frame that I needed to ensure that I had proper depth of field. And consequently, while I'm satisfied with the image, I don't really feel that I took the time to appreciate the experience of really being there.
And if you take the time to really slow down and let the awareness of being in the place just sink in, then regardless of the photographs, you're going to go home feeling enriched and having had an incredible time in a really beautiful place. Okay, I think that's it for this video. If you've got any questions, just drop me a comment or an email and I'll get back to you. And that's also it for Iceland. I'm heading home tomorrow, but I'll be back here next year. So if you'd like to join me, I'll have a couple of workshops here in 2023, and you can find all the information on my website. I'm also going to lots of different places. I'll be in Namibia, I'll be in Lofoten, I'll be in the Dolomites. So please check out the website. I'd love to have you join me on a workshop next year. And as always, thanks for watching, take care, and good luck with your own photography. See ya.